What's going on, everyone? Chris back again with another list. No, it's not the list of Jericho. This is the list of Ludak, based off a suggestion given by JQXZ Network. I'd gotten some really good feedback on my lists of the top 10 closing segments in Raw history and the top 5 closing segments in SmackDown history. I decided to take one of his suggestions and create another top 5 video. This time I'm going into the top 5 segments in the history of WCW Nitro. So taking it back a little bit. So looking back at the history of Nitro, there's a lot to choose from, and I narrowed it down to my personal 5 favorite and what I think were the best segments. So let me know if you agree or disagree, but I want to get right into it. So at number 5, we have Lex Luger defeating Hollywood Hulk Hogan for the World Heavyweight title on the August 4th, 1997 edition of Nitro. This match had come about because Luger had been demanding a title shot that he had earned for quite some time. And I think they were billing this as the 100th episode of Nitro, so they wanted to do something special. And they actually went 3 hours that night, which was one of the first times Nitro had gone 3 hours before doing it on a permanent basis all through 1998. In this match, near the end of it, Hogan actually hits his leg drop of doom, and Luger kicks out. After Luger kicks out, Hogan goes for the leg drop again, and this time Luger is able to move out of the way. He hits a clothesline, and then the old reliable, the NWO interferes. The fans even kind of die down after this because they're expecting a DQ finish, so there's no title change. Lex is able to get rid of Scott Hall, and then he sends him into Kevin Nash. He also gets rid of the Macho Man Randy Savage, who comes off the top rope trying for his double axe handle. He then hits the running forearm on Hogan. And then after that, he's able to find, I think what happens there is he then knocks Hall off the apron again. Signals for the torture rack. He gets Hogan up in the rack. And then, with the crowd going crazy, Hogan submits. And Lex Luger is the new WCW Heavyweight Champion of the world. The music hits, and the ring fills up. All the baby faces come in. At first, it's the Giant, along with the Steiner brothers. Glacier was also in there, who they were still trying to push at the time. But then also others come out like Alex Wright, Dean Malenko, guys who weren't necessarily baby faces. A couple of them were in the tweener role, but were still Team WCW. So you had a lot of the roster. I think even the Faces of Fear come out, and everyone is there to celebrate Luger bringing home the world title back to WCW after Hogan had held it for almost a year at that point in the NWO. The celebration then continues in the back. They're pouring champagne on Luger. Rey Mysterio Jr. is then there with them, along with the Steiners. And they're also, at the NWO insignia had been spray painted on the belt. They were trying to wash that off the belt. And they were celebrating like it was like an NBA championship or a World Series, popping champagne in the back and pouring it on them in celebration. While in contrast, Hogan was going berserk, screaming that it wasn't fair, he wasn't ready, tearing up the backstage area with the NWO, looking pissed. Macho Man screaming that it was a fluke, and Hogan saying that he's going to get his belt back soon, because they did have their rematch 5 days later, which Hogan won and got the belt back, but that's besides the point. But for that moment, and with the crowd reaction, it really established Lex Luger as the company's biggest star, the guy who had been pushed as the leader of WCW for over a year at this point, with Sting in the Raptors and not competing on a week-to-week basis for over a year. And it definitely was the pinnacle for Lex Luger in his time in WCW during that specific run. So that's number 5. At number 4, we have the final Nitro ever in 2001. And we have, to me, what was almost a surreal moment was Vince McMahon opening the last Nitro ever in March of 2001 and declaring that he now owns WCW. So with that, it was Vince standing there saying, imagine that. Vince McMahon on WCW television. How? And then he reveals that's because I, Vince McMahon, have bought my competition. And he says, that's right, I own WCW. And he said, tonight in a simulcast, I will have a chance to address the WCW, and he called them superstars, even though they're wrestlers, but he had to call them WCW superstars, and address the WCW fans. And he said, I hold the fate of WCW in the very palm of my hand. And like I said, this felt like a very surreal moment because prior to that Nitro, I had been informed actually by my dad. He was the one who gave me the news. He said, hey, that previous Friday beforehand, he said, the WWF actually bought out their competition today. And I said, wait, they bought out WCW? They own WCW? I went online, it was official. Yeah, they bought WCW. I didn't know what to believe at first because I didn't know, if Nitro was just going to continue on as a separate entity with just WWF owning it, or how things were going to go, because I really couldn't believe it, actually. I didn't believe that WCW was actually done. But then when I saw Vince open Nitro, it really set in. I was like, wow, this really is it for WCW. Seeing Vince open that show was definitely something I had never expected up to that point. I was very young, but still, I was really floored by it. And it definitely is a memorable moment that people still talk about. So that's why it belongs on this list, and that's why it's number 4. Number 3 is a memorable moment, and not for a good reason. Number 3 takes us back to January 4th of 1999, and it is the finger poke of doom. Like I said, these are memorable moments and top moments, but they aren't all positive, in my opinion. I have gone into this in a previous episode when I talked about Bill Goldberg. I will leave a link to it down in the description if you want to hear more about it, but this is a memorable moment because to me this is the first death nail in WCW, and them truly going downhill and really losing any footing they had to be a real contender to the WWF at the time, now WWE. Bill Goldberg was set to face Kevin Nash in a rematch from Starrcade to win back potentially his world title that he lost unfairly when Hall hit him with a taser. But he was accused of stalking Miss Elizabeth and was taken downtown and was put in the precinct. So Nash then challenged Hogan and said, I know you're behind this. And he said, as a warm-up, I want to take you on before giving Goldberg his rematch because Nash was the world champion. Ric Flair makes it official. And then they have their match, and they're having their stare down. Nash shoves Hogan into the corner. Hogan comes back, acts like he's going to punch Nash. And then, if you've seen it before, he pokes Nash in the chest. Kevin Nash takes this huge back bump. Hogan covers him, and he's the new champion. And that, for some reason, they thought was a good idea. It turns out to all be a hoax, and now everyone is celebrating. So now the Wolfpack and NWO Hollywood, who've been feuding for almost a year at that point, all band together, and now the whole band is back together. And while they're celebrating, Goldberg, who had finally been released, gets back to the Georgia Dome, runs back from the backstage up the aisle, and he attacks the NWO. He takes out Steiner. He takes out Hall. He takes out Nash. And then he is able to spear Hogan. It looks like when he's about to put him in the jackhammer, he is going to get attacked, but Lex Luger comes to his aid, or so we think. But then Luger attacks Bill Goldberg. And Luger, who had been a member of the Wolfpack as a babyface, turns heel and joins this newly reformed heel version of the NWO. They beat down Goldberg. They hit him with a taser a few times. They continue to beat him down. Luger puts him in the torture rack. And then they handcuff him to the ropes. And then they taser him. Scott Hall is the one who does that quite a few times. Then, because they thought this was a good idea to make their top babyface look like an even bigger idiot, they spray paint him with NWO like he's some random jobber. And they spray paint his bald head. And they continue to hit him with the continue zapping him with the taser, I should say. And then, of course, they have to go and they spray paint the belt red and black with the NWO. They all celebrate, and Kevin Nash goes, "Can you say deja vu?" Because they thought this was going to bring them back on top and get them back to being the #1 company in the world. And really, like I said, it was one of the main reasons why WCW went down the shitter after that. Never won a ratings war again, and we're out of business about 2 years later. So, I guess deja vu isn't always a good thing, is it, Kevin Nash? And if you want to hear me go more into why it was so bad for WCW and just bad overall as a stupid decision, like I said, I'll leave the link to the Goldberg episode, what if he had recaptured the world title that night, down below. So now that I've pissed myself off all over again thinking about that moment, let's talk about number 2. Number 2 brings us to May of 1996. And I think everyone can guess what it is. And it is the first time we saw Scott Hall come through the crowd and lay down the challenge to the WCW. And it was the start of the most successful angle in the wrestling business ever. I don't think anything's actually topped it, even the Bloodline. And that is the start of the formation of the NWO. In the middle of Nitro, the Mauler, I think it was, and Steve Dahl were having a match. And you can see the crowd kind of looking behind themselves because in the match, you can actually see Scott Hall coming through the crowd. He comes up, walks over the railing, and the commentators, you hear Larry Zbyszko go, "What the hell's this?" And Scott Hall says, "Give me a mic." He takes a mic and goes into the ring, and the Mauler, along with his manager Rob Parker, just kind of leave the ring. And now Scott Hall has the ring to himself. And to make it feel more legitimate, you hear Tony Schiavone even say, "Can we get security? Where's security?" And Scott Hall starts off with that trademark, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." And he goes on to say, "Where is Billionaire Ted? Where is Skiing Gene? Where's the Nacho Man?" He talks about how that punk can't even get in the building. Scott Hall, still in the Razor Ramon accent, which is very important, still doing a promo like he's Razor Ramon from the WWF, says, I go wherever I want, whenever I want. And then he says about Mean Gene Okerlund, the one he called Scheme Gene, he said, when that Ken doll, when that weatherman wannabe gets here, I got a scoop for him. And he said, I have a challenge for Billionaire Ted, for the Nacho Man, and he said for anyone else in the, and he goes, WCW, clearly mocking them, and said, you want a war? You're gonna get one. And then he's told to leave the ring, so he just leaves. But he laid down the challenge, and like I said, he did it in the mannerisms and persona of Razor Ramon. And it made a lot of people, especially people my age, because I wasn't even 10 years old at this point, but I remember thinking that Razor Ramon was in WCW now, and the WWF was challenging WCW to an all-out war, which I know from the start, that's what they want people to think. That's why, again, he didn't say his name, but he was cutting promos, not as Scott Hall, but he was cutting it in the Razor Ramon persona to try to blur those lines and make people think that he was an actual outsider coming in from the WWF and that he had been sent by Vince. I know, very young me, I fell for it. Obviously, due to legal matters, they couldn't do that, and they did have to clarify at Great American Bash that year, a month later, that they didn't work for the WWF. But that is obviously still one of the most memorable moments in wrestling, one of the top moments on Nitro that was talked about for years, and it paved the way for the Bash at the Beach moment, with Hulk Hogan turning on Randy Savage in that 6-man tag match, and it started the birth, like I said, of the NWO. So that is number 2, and I think a lot of people would agree that that definitely belongs on the list. Before I get to number 1, I do want to talk about one honorable mention I have. And in terms of top moments on Nitro, I think actually if we go back to the first Nitro, that took place at the Mall of America. I think an honorable mention needs to be going back again and talking about Lex Luger. It needs to be the debut episode of Nitro where Lex Luger made his return to WCW by walking out on that first Nitro. That was a really big moment because Luger had literally just wrestled for the WWF, I think like literally just one night ago, and just 1 week before that had made an appearance at SummerSlam to help the then WWF champion Diesel, Kevin Nash, successfully regain his title. And it looked like obviously he was still going to be used in semi-prominent angles, and I remember thinking he was still with the WWF since he had been part of that SummerSlam. But no, he had been working on a handshake deal. He didn't have a contract. He let his good friend Sting know about that. Eric Bischoff offered him the deal. And in the match, in the main event match between Flair and Sting, Luger comes out there, and they tried to make it like it was a big deal. They tried to really play it up with Eric Bischoff saying, what is he doing here? Get security. What is this guy doing here? And also trying to make it sound like he's not under contract with WCW, and they had no idea how he even got there in the first place. Luger has even said that he was not brought backstage until a half hour before he was supposed to go out. He was kept in a car. And apparently he was brought into a back area of the building where no one could see him because they did not want this getting out at all. So I think there was a lot of genuine shock when he did come out. And I think it really did announce WCW's arrival for the Monday Night Wars, because Luger will go down as the first defector of the Monday Night Wars, jumping ship from the WWF to the WCW. And I think it really sent Vince and the WWF a message saying they weren't kidding around, they were there to play. Considering their slogan at the time was WCW, where the big boys play. And it was definitely a memorable moment for many reasons. Like I said, one, because everyone's thought, from what I heard, Vince thought he had Luger wrapped up and that he was going to sign a new contract. So that had to surprise him. And it just had to show, obviously, WWF that they weren't kidding around and that they were taking the war right to them. And it led to, for those almost 6 years, 5.5 years, some of the best times in wrestling to be a fan. So that deserves honorable mention. Now going to number one. The number one moment in Nitro history brings us back now to July of 1998. And it is Bill Goldberg defeating Hollywood Hogan to become the World Heavyweight Champion. Bill Goldberg had been undefeated up to this point and was the U.S. champion. So he was also looking to become a 2-title holder. J.J. Dillon on the Thunder before this Nitro announced that Goldberg was the number one contender and that Hogan was contractually obligated to defend the title against him. They were in the Georgia Dome with like over 40,000 people apparently. And Goldberg had played in the NFL for the Atlanta Falcons, so he was definitely a huge crowd favorite. The match ends again with Hogan actually hit 3 leg drops on Goldberg, so semi-similar to the match with Luger a year before. And Goldberg kicks out of all 3 leg drops. And then he starts obviously making his comeback. And what happens there is Curt Hennig comes down the ring because he was representing the NWO trying to interfere. Before he could interfere, Karl Malone, who was scheduled to wrestle Hogan and Rodman in that mixed tag match with DDP at Bash at the Beach, hits Curt Hennig with a diamond cutter. That distracts Hogan long enough for Goldberg to regain his energy and spear Hogan. Now the crowd is going insane and Bobby Heenan is screaming, "That's part 1, now finish him off." So with that, Bill Goldberg then hooks up Hogan and he picks him up and he hits him with the jackhammer. And then 1, 2, 3, we have a new champion and the crowd loses their mind. And Bobby Heenan is going, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Because I don't think he actually knew what was supposed to happen. I don't think anyone clued him in. So I think that reaction was legitimate. And I know that Heenan looked at Goldberg legitimately as the golden goose for that company at that point. And it obviously not only gave a new guy, a younger guy, a break against not only an established legend, but the biggest star in wrestling history, to defeat him cleanly on a Nitro, randomly, made his career. He was billed as an undefeated world champion. And he was honestly, probably behind Stone Cold at that point, the second biggest star in wrestling. That's how huge Goldberg got. So with that, not only did he win the world title, WCW, who was still trying to fight and remain relevant in the Monday Night Wars, won the ratings war that night. And no doubt that actually had to please Bischoff, who had his 83-week streak ended earlier in that year in April of 98. So at that point, it was still pretty close, and it looked like they had a world champion who was just as over as Stone Cold in WWF, and someone they could truly build around. And that is still, honestly, like I said, talking to old school WCW fans, a very memorable moment that they look back fondly on. And it actually turned a lot of people on to WCW because of the star power of Goldberg. So that is number 1. So that's the end of the list there. Let me know what you think of my top 5 moments in Nitro history in the comments down below. Also, let me know what you think, if there should have been any other moments included in maybe an honorable mention, or if you would have swapped any of them out, or if you would have even reversed the order of some of them. Definitely, again, thank you to JQXZ Network for this suggestion. I will still be back soon with another episode of What Could Have Been in Wrestling, and also still working on the match analysis series as well, which I'm committed to restarting, like I said last video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you everyone, like I said, for your comments and support, and I'll be back soon. Take care, guys.